The purpose of this video is looking at speech structure, and it's a guide to writing an effective speech that's clear and easy to decipher. When we present, our first priority is being clear, and that's often really difficult when someone just goes blah, 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 blah for 5 or 6 minutes and expects us to keep up. It's the responsibility of the speaker to make our meaning clear and organized. So why do we use structure? Well, it tells the audience what to expect. It gives the audience a guide as to how information will be shared and in what order. And it also allows us as the speaker to reinforce our content more than once to make sure it gets through. You know, repetition is an important thing. So having the opportunity to clearly restate things makes meaning more effective. And at the end of the day, you want people to walk away having taken something from what you have said. That's what this is all about. Imagine sitting in a classroom for 10 minutes listening to continuous speaking. You know, what do you think might happen? Imagine yourself. What are the likely risks that's going to happen if someone's just going blah, 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 continuing without a break for 10 minutes? Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think there's a good chance that you might lose concentration or attention. Now that might be on purpose because you say to yourself, this person's boring, or it might be by accident, you know, like a bird starts cheeping at the window, you look over there, you come back, and 2 seconds later, you don't know what the person's talking about anymore. And therefore, you know, the next 9 minutes are meaningless to you. You might not understand what's being spoken about. You know, if someone just gets up and they kind of start saying, oh, you know, I'm talking about this, that, and the other, and they haven't made it clear what their purpose is, it might be that you just don't know what they're talking about from the beginning, and no matter how hard you listen, it doesn't make sense. Or even if it does make sense, you might not be able to keep up with it because they're going so fast, or they're so complicated, or they're moving on too quickly, and therefore you simply don't have an opportunity to process your thoughts and take a break. Structure allows us to overcome these problems. That's why it's important. It's about effective communication. It's not about adding additional work just for the sake of it. So the basics of structure. This is just a simple explanation, but I think it's really powerful in telling you what you want to achieve. The purpose of an introduction is to tell us what you plan to tell us. The body is where you tell us those things, and the conclusion is where you tell us what you've told us. Now, like I said, a simple explanation, but there's some really important stuff here. In the introduction, you should make it really clear as to what you're going to talk about and the order by which you're going to talk about it. Okay, the introduction is basically telling people how long they have to listen to you and how much information you're going to share. It allows people to prepare to take in what you're about to say. If you're clear about that, it makes a huge difference. The body is what people know to be the main content. That's where the main depth is going to be. That's where they're going to be listening to the things you have said that they're going to be listening to. It shouldn't be a mystery. You know, you shouldn't be trying to catch people off by saying, oh, and I'm going to add something that you didn't know was coming. You should be really clear and fulfilling what you've said you're going to do. Now, the conclusion is where you reinforce those same things. And a big rule for the conclusion is that you never add additional information. You shouldn't be, like a conclusion shouldn't be, oh, and by the way, here's something I didn't tell you. Okay, you are simply restating the information that you've already told us. Why? Because repetition is effective and it allows us to reinforce the connection between that information. Okay, so we walk away with a really clear sense of exactly what you were on about and why. Signposting is a particular skill that's relevant to speaking. They use it all of the time in debating, and there's a very good reason for it. So the second part of this video from here onwards is me teaching you what signposting is and how to use it. So in a nutshell, in spoken language, signposting helps us to make it clear using numbers and references how our speech will progress. It's actually about creating a code or a system of language that tells people what to expect. It gives the audience an opportunity to get back into the speech if they lose you at any point. We gave the example before about someone's talking for 10 minutes. You know, maybe your phone goes off or someone knocks at the door and all of a sudden you're distracted, and then you just have to sit there for 9 minutes because you're not not following it anymore. If we signpost, we are making clear opportunities for people to get back into the speech at different points along the way and still get meaning out of it. It gives an indication as to how far you are through your speech and how much longer someone has to listen. You know, you might think that's a little thing, but just imagine for yourself listening to someone in a classroom or a teacher carrying on. You know, it's good to have indications of how much longer this is going to go for. How much more do I need to be concentrating? And of course, it gives the opportunity to reinforce ideas. It creates a clear framework for people to digest your information. If you tell people that they will only need to remember 3 things at the end of your speech, then they will get themselves in that position to take in those 3 different things. Okay, if you don't tell people how much they're going to have to remember, they're going to be a bit confused and nervous and apprehensive, and they're not going to take in the meaning quite as well. So let me give you an example of what this might look like. I'm going to show you the introduction, the paragraph, and the conclusion. These are just rough examples. The idea is that you would take these and manipulate them to create your own sense of meaning. Here we go. Greetings. Today I'll be arguing that public transport is too expensive. I will be supporting my case with 3 key arguments. The first argument is that the cost of transport is the same as driving a car, so we're not encouraging people to use it. My second point is that in comparison to other countries, Australia is far more expensive, which raises the question as to why. My third argument is that the people who need public transport are usually on low income, which begs the question as to who we are trying to support. So in this case, the thing that I've highlighted is my use of numbers. I've made it really clear that I'm going to be sharing 3 different arguments, and I've given just a snapshot of what each of those arguments are going to be before I deliver them. This is really important, and you'll see why in just a second. Let's go to the paragraph. What you can see is the language is carrying across. I will now proceed with my first argument, that the cost of transport is the same as driving a car, so we are not encouraging people to use it. A recent study by Flinders University suggests that, and here I've said this is where you'd share your evidence and your persuasive devices, okay? But you'll notice I used that first sentence there to use the exact same language as before, so by this point I've repeated that line twice, but that's good because it means that the audience are more likely to remember it. At the end of the argument, you can see this brings me, there's a bit of spelling error there, this brings me to the end of my first argument. Now, when I get to the end, if I make it really clear that I've gotten to the end of my first argument, this is where if someone tuned out during the first argument, what I'm doing here is I'm giving them an opportunity to get back onto my speech, because now I'm saying I will now proceed with my second argument, that in comparison to other countries, Australia is far more expensive. Countries such as Singapore, London, and the United States, and of course here I go on and share my persuasive devices. In this case, I'm using comparison. The key point here is that the person who wasn't listening to my first argument can pick up on the second argument, and they know that they don't need to remember anything from before. I've given them a clear opportunity to get back on board. Okay, and I do this multiple times. You know, if I'm speaking for 4 minutes, you know, every minute I'm giving someone an opportunity to get back onto what I'm saying. Here's my example conclusion. This brings an end to my argument that public transport is too expensive. I have shared with you 3 clear reasons why this is the case. Firstly, I shared that, and you can see I've just written in here, this is where you'd summarize your argument. I might not necessarily say exactly the same as I said before, because I might be pushing the repetition factor a little bit too much, but I'll give a clear indication of the point that I've made. I'm still using that same number reference. Firstly, secondly, and finally, I was able to show how. I'm reinforcing the exact key things that I said. So if someone's been listening to me for the last 3 or 4 minutes, they will know that the first argument I said I was going to talk about is what I spoke about first and is what I summarized first. Okay, they click in with that language of me saying firstly or the first. You can see at the end, I sum it all up by saying these 3 points clearly prove that. Okay, and I'll usually use a sentence there to kind of summarize or conclude my case. All right. So the benefit of this, my speech is really clearly organized and people knew what to expect as I was speaking. I made it really clear and consistent when I was beginning a new argument. If someone became distracted during my first argument, they would know that they could get back onto the speech when I said, this brings me to the end of my first argument, etc. At this point, they know that they don't have to have listened to the previous point in order for this section to make sense. Now, what do I want you to do with this information? Well, look, in writing your own persuasive speech or speech of any type, build clear signposts into the speech. Make it really clear when you are ending one point and beginning another. That's an opportunity for your audience. Look, it can be really difficult to listen for an extended period of time, and your audience will ultimately have an easier time following you if you use this method. And the feedback you'll probably get is, I really liked your speech, it was really easy to follow. And that's probably the best form of feedback you can get as a speaker. Look, I hope that this technique comes in handy to you and that it's useful in planning your speech. I wish you the best of luck in your future speaking endeavors.